So hello from Sherry Forsyth on this live video dealing with the 5 stages of grief, or are there maybe more? And apologies to those who might have seen this video. I'm a bit technologically challenged, and when I did the live video this morning, somehow I managed to lose the video. So this is a replay. If you have already seen the previous one, I don't want to bore you by asking you to watch a second time. However, there will be the facility now to share the video, which there possibly wasn't the previous time. So I welcome you and I thank you so much for giving me your time this morning. We, as I've mentioned, are going to be discussing the different stages of grieving, and we're going to dive straight in. Okay, by looking at the 5 stages that were designed by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who did groundbreaking work in the earlier part of the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s possibly, where she did a lot of work with the people who were dying, and she came up with these 5 stages. We all know these stages. I'm sure we're familiar with them. So just to mention the stages as you can see them behind me: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then finally moving to acceptance. People recently, the people who are they out there, have added 2 more stages to these 5 stages. And so fitting in here, right at the top, before we can go into denial, is shock. And I think that that's very relevant when somebody close to us dies. No matter even if we've prepared ourselves for it, we will feel shock. Then we'll go into denial and we'll go through the various stages. And in between depression and acceptance is a stage they call testing, which is we are trying to start moving forward and moving through our grief, and be testing different ways to see what will work for us. So those are 2 stages that have been added. Now, I really admire the work that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did. But what the world did, what psychologists in the world did, is we took her work, which she did on people who were dying, and we took that information and have applied it to people who are grieving. And so that's why I feel there are more stages to the process when you are grieving. So I just want to say again, Elizabeth did the work on the people who actually were dying. What we're talking about is we're talking about the people who are left behind, and they are the ones who are grieving. So they will go through a similar process, but it's different because they aren't actually dying. It's their loved ones who have already passed away. And now what do we do? So I hope that makes sense to you. So I'm going to dive straight in with my massively beautiful artwork to show you how I see the stages of grieving. Okay, so we start. And life is going along very happily and very smoothly, we hope. And then, sadly, we get the shocking news of the loss of someone close to us. And so we start walking down this valley of grieving, of loss. But you do notice that we do come up the other side. And so we do heal. And it's good for you to know that. As we go down this valley, so we're going to be experiencing the different stages. And in my opinion, there are more than 5. But you will see that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages are all part of the stages that I'm going to mention. So we're going to start with shock. The minute we hear about the loss, there's this suffusion of chemicals through our body that's sent there to protect us and to help us cope with things gradually, as mentioned in previous videos. And the shock then and the chemicals that are immediately excreted into our body result in numbness. So we have numbness that sets in. And this numbness lasts for as long as it lasts, and as it eases away, or it eases away as it knows we can handle more and more. Then we go on to disbelief. We wake up in the morning, we think we've had a nightmare, but in fact to find out that it's true. And for a while we hope it's not true. So that disbelief is very much part of the grieving process. Linked to disbelief is anxiety, which comes when we are concerned about practical things like my spouse has passed away and I now need to take over all the finances and I don't know how to do that, and the anxiety that comes with that. I think also anxiety for many people is, will I cope with the power of the painful loss? Will I be able to withstand it? Have I got the capacity, in fact, to endure, because these feelings are so incredibly powerful, and that makes us feel anxious. Also, the feelings that we get when we're anxious are very similar to those that we experience in grief. The butterflies in the tummy, the heaviness in our chests, the palpitations of our heart. Those are all, physically, the symptoms are very similar. So anxiety is one of the stages. I don't need to speak too much about pain. I'm assuming you're familiar with it and you know how devastating it can be. And that pain varies in intensity, which we've spoken about as well in previous sessions. Then we can move on to anger. We can be angry with ourselves for what we did or didn't do. We can be angry with the person that died because how dare they leave us and have us have to carry on living and breathing when they're not with us. And very often the anger is taken out on people who are close to us. So if you are supporting someone who is like the main mourner, if I can say that, and they are very angry, just know that it is part of the process, and try and be as kind as you can within that. Okay, after the anger, or not necessarily after, but we experience sadness. And you'll see I have tried to do this is roughly in the order that it might happen in a perfect world, which, as we know, grieving isn't. Sadness is different from depression. And very often GPs, when you've lost somebody, will immediately put you on antidepressants. Well, it's the most normal thing in the world to be sad when you've lost someone. So sadness doesn't require antidepressants. But if that sadness becomes permanent, and if it's been there for 6 months or more, deep sadness, then it's certainly worth looking at seeing whether you are clinically depressed, which is a chemical, physiological state of your body, in which case you definitely do need antidepressants. But sadness itself doesn't require an antidepressant, and I think it's very over-medicated. So we experience the sadness, which is similar to despair. Despair. I don't need to say anything more about it. We can then also go into confusion. As I mentioned in previous videos, confusion can be great. We forget where we leave our car keys and find them in the fridge. we drive through electronic gates, we go to the grocery shop and we forget our list and we can't even remember what we need. All those kind of things. We can't read, we can't concentrate to read a book. They're very normal in the process of grieving. And so I'd like to answer a question now that's coming from Ted. He is asking whether you have to experience all of these stages in order to feel that you have completely healed. And he also asks whether you have to do them in order. So if I can answer Ted, no, you don't have to do them in order. You can experience many of these in one day and then none for a number of days. So you don't have to experience them in order. And the second part of the question is, do you have to experience all of these stages? Absolutely not. Remember, grief is a very personal journey. And some people do need certain stages and other people never feel them. So, for example, in the loss of our daughter, never ever felt anger. But I know that there are many parents in the loss of a child who do have a lot of anger. But that's just the way it is. That's the way I was, and that's the way somebody else was. So you don't have to experience them in order, and you don't have to experience all of them. As I've said before, grief is quite a messy process. So I hope that's helped you, Ted. So we're going to move along. After confusion, we can suffer from apathy. We don't care. We feel quite battered. And so whatever's happening in the world, we don't actually we're not really interested, and we don't care. And once again, as long as it doesn't last too long, it's a completely normal part of the grieving process. Loneliness is a big one. There's emptiness in the bed alongside you. There's the empty place at the dining room table. Very graphic indications that person is no longer with you. And it's very tough to walk through those feelings. Also, believe it or not, when you've lost your spouse, friendship groups that you've been with for many, many years suddenly drop you. You're not being invited anymore because, I don't know, you're a single person and maybe you're going to upset the balance of the table. I'm not sure. But as bizarre as that sounds, it's a very real thing for people who lose their spouse. They also lose their friendship circle or part of it. So just to be aware of that. We experience fear of the future. What is life going to be like without my loved one? How am I going to manage? Frightened because I don't know what is in store for me. And because I'm quite vulnerable, the fear really manifests itself within me. This is a big one too. Volatility. Very often we become defensive and therefore quite volatile when we don't know what to do. We're unsure of how to manage a situation, which is exactly what grief is. We don't know what we're doing. This is probably the first time we're walking this journey. And so it results in, well, lack of knowledge results in volatility, which can be very upsetting if the person that you know is normally calm and kind, and suddenly they're like raving lunatics. But it's because they're not sure what to do with the emotions that they're feeling. Sadly, this volatility, once again, like the anger, is often taken out on the nearest and dearest. So if you are one of those, just to know, receive it, try not to be judgmental, try and do some calming down of your love, or the person who's grieving, and try and understand where they're coming from. We can blame. We can blame ourselves. We can blame others. It's a very disempowering emotion to blame others and to just feel that the situation, because we're so angry about it and we don't know what to do, we're going to blame the fact that my husband gave him the motorbike, or we're going to blame ourselves for not caring enough, or blame ourselves for why couldn't we see that he was battling with an addiction, which eventually resulted in their death. So blame is a very negative stage, and it's very closely related to guilt. Guilt is the emotion that has the lowest frequency, lowest energetic frequency. So in other words, there's not a lot of positivity about guilt at all. These two together, there's not a lot of positivity. So to try and get around that as soon as you can would help you immensely. Then we can suffer from withdrawal. So suddenly we don't have the energy. Grieving is hard work, and we don't have the energy to go out to be social functions, family functions, even just going out to the shop. And so we can withdraw into our little cocoon. Once again, as long as it doesn't last for too long, that's quite healthy. What we're doing is we're just making sure we're protecting our energy so that we don't just give it out all the time. Emptiness, the emptiness of not having that person part of your life. I don't have to explain that at all anymore. Irritability. Irritability is a big one. We often, if you think of yourself when you're stressed, you can get very irritable. When you are very pressured at work, you can get very irritable. So it's the same in the grieving process. We're stressed, we're pressured, we don't know what we're doing. This journey is new, it's overpowering, it's taking a lot of, it's making lots of demands on us. And therefore, it's very natural that we would or possibly could feel irritable. So if you are on the receiving end of that, once again, I ask you to try and just be understanding and kind. Bargaining. This is where we can kind of feel we've lost our marbles a little bit, because we know that that person has died, and yet we sometimes bargain with God to bring them back. And I think this is where bargaining is very much more part of the person who is dying rather than the people who are grieving. So if I am dying, I will say, I promise, I will not have any more sugar because I know I'm a diabetic, and if you will just let me live. Or I promise I will start going to church if you will let me live. So for me, the bargaining is more part of those who are dying than those who are grieving. Then we have depression, which, as I've mentioned before, is different from sadness. And if it has been, for longer than 6 months, go to a GP, have yourself evaluated, but don't just as a matter of course, when you're feeling sad, feel you need antidepressants. Depression is a very real thing, and it is present in a lot of people who are grieving, but it's not automatic. Loss of confidence. This happens because this is a new journey for you. You don't actually know what we're doing. And suddenly there are all sorts of questions that are coming at us. And because we don't know the answers to them, we can lose our confidence. Because we are no longer maybe say a mother of that child, or who are we? So there are many questions that arise during the process of grieving, and because we have no certainty or knowledge about them, it can lead to a loss of confidence of who am I, where do I fit in in the big scheme of things. The next one is disorganization. Our brains are not functioning normally. My husband would say it probably doesn't function normally most of the time, but generally during the grieving time, disorganization is very, very common. We forget what we're doing, we can't plan properly, which is why often when people are going back to work maybe a little bit too soon, they can't focus fully on their workload, and they forget things, and the disorganization is it's reflecting a disorganized brain. My husband sent me a WhatsApp diagram which showed pretty much the same as this without all the millions of stages I have, all very nicely drawn. And then next to it was the similar diagram. But the person said, my grief wasn't very neat like this. And they said, this is what my grief looked like. And it was just scribbles all over the diagram. And I think that's very valid. I think a lot of people, their grief journey is like that. It's not pretty, it's not neat, it's not a simple, clean process of moving from one step to the next. It's messy, it's all over the place. And so I'm not going to scribble over my artwork here, but I do want to re-emphasize that it is not a linear and organized process. So as we are coming down this valley, we don't come down and experience some of these in order. We jump all over the show. So we might start coming down, and then we get to the fearful place, then we jump straight back to disbelief, we go back to shock, we come back down again, we're volatile, we go back to sadness, to despair, to sadness. So it's up and down, back and forth for as long as it takes. As we've said before, grief, the journey, will take as long as it takes. So I want to speak very briefly about what happens when you get stuck. And this is where people are not moving forward. They are not taking a step. There's no movement at all. They actually are just doing the same old day after day. And so what happens as you are coming down this side of the valley and experiencing all these stages, when you get stuck, you will find one that makes you feel really comfortable. And it might be sadness. Okay, it works for me. If I stay there, lots of people are running around me and doing all sorts of things for me because I'm so sad, because I'm the grieving person. And we can make all sorts of rules and regulations as to why we should stay there. But we stay there actually because it works for us and we are comfortable. And so then there's no need to try and get through this valley and come up the other side. We get stuck there. So we'll be speaking next time about dysfunctional grief. The next Thursday we'll be discussing that. And if you get stuck in one of these stages, your grief can become dysfunctional. So if you are finding that you're stuck, you at least know now why. And what we're wanting is for there to be not getting stuck. It doesn't matter how many times you go up and down, at least that's still movement. And eventually what will happen is you need to come down to the bottom and move through what I call the dark night of the soul. Those are those really dark days when it's really tough, where you feel your emotions are just overwhelming you and you don't feel much positivity, you don't feel much hope, and you can't see actually the sense of everything that's happened to you. And so you start moving through this valley, and once again, you move a little bit forward and back and forward and back and forward and back, and eventually you'll make it through. And what you need to negotiate the dark night of the soul are perseverance. Okay, we need perseverance. We need courage. We need emotional resilience. And we need strength. Okay, all of those things are just showing staying power. And I'm appealing to you, don't give up. these 4 things are saying the same thing. Don't give up. Even if you are back and forth a few times, that's okay. That's part of the process. But don't give up and then go back and get stuck in one of these and get stuck maybe in dysfunctional grief. So with perseverance, courage, emotional resilience, and strength, we eventually move through the dark night of the soul, or the valley of the grieving process, and we come to acceptance. We come to acceptance. Long journey to get there, but we eventually get there. And then we start moving up towards healing. And usually when you have come through this valley and start coming up the other side, very seldom do you go right back into this deep valley. You might on odd days have suffer a few of these stages, but generally you won't go back to that dark night of the soul. And as you start moving up towards healing and recovery, what we are aiming at is that you don't go back to the same level that you were at as a person. You're going to harness all the growth that happened as you were going through your journey of grieving, going through all these stages. You're harnessing all that learning. And in fact, what happens is there is a new improved you. And so you end up on a much higher level than you were before. You are more compassionate, you're more understanding, you see things differently, you're far more forgiving, you know what your priorities are in life. And as a result of that, some of the things that might have held you back or challenged you in the past suddenly have just been, you can let them go gently. So we have a new improved version of you. And so that is what the grieving process is and can be. So as we come up here, there's hope, there's positivity, there's light, there's understanding, and we move to a healing and recovery process, which leads us to being better than we were before. So that is my challenge to you. So if you've liked this video and you feel that it's valuable, I ask you please to at the bottom of the video to share it, like it, join my Facebook page, Life Vision, join my YouTube channel, and let's try and continue the discussion surrounding grieving. Let's not allow it to remain that silent topic that no one speaks about. And so as we go forward in this week, I ask you, instead of being irritated, judgmental, not being able to see what's happening in the person that is grieving, or it might be you yourself, I ask you to be more understanding rather than more irritable. And to allow that person who is in the mourning process to feel your love, your kindness, and your compassion. So I thank you once again for your time and for joining me live. I remind you that next Thursday I will be doing another live video on the dysfunction of grief and what that is and when we need to get worried about where we are. And that also will allow your heart to just take a breath and relax. So thank you once again and have a very good week.